The morning shift at St. Mary's Hospital was finally over. Emma Caldwell slipped off her gloves and pressed the back of her hand against her temple, feeling the dull ache of exhaustion settle in. Outside the window, snow was falling in slow, silent sheets, Minneapolis wrapped in its winter hush. The world looked peaceful, almost merciful, which felt like a cruel joke. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Aaron, can we meet?" "Same place. 11 a.m. For a moment, she just stared at the message, uncertain why her chest tightened. Aaron rarely texted like that. No heart, no warmth. Just words stripped of everything familiar. She typed "on my way" before she could think twice. By the time Emma reached the café downtown, the snow had thickened, swirling like smoke around the glass facade. The place smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon, a comfort she couldn't feel. She spotted Aaron immediately, sitting by the window, his blazer neatly folded over the chair, his phone face down on the table. He didn't smile when he saw her. She forced one anyway. "You look like someone who's about to give bad news," she said, trying to keep it light. Aaron didn't answer right away. He stirred his coffee instead, the metal spoon clinking against porcelain. "I've been thinking," he began, voice low but deliberate, "about us." Emma froze. That phrase, "about us," had ended more relationships than she could count. "Okay," she said quietly. He exhaled, looking anywhere but at her. "I don't think we should get married." It landed like a physical blow. The hum of espresso machines and muffled chatter blurred into white noise. "What?" Aaron leaned back, as if distance could soften the impact. "It's not working. You're great, Emma, you really are. But I've changed. Things have changed." She stared at him, disbelief tightening her throat. "Changed? We set a date. We signed the lease." "I know." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "But there's someone else." Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Who?" He hesitated for only a second. "Natalie Doyle." It was like the air had been punched out of her lungs. "Patrick Doyle's daughter," she whispered. "Your father's investor." Aaron didn't deny it. He simply looked at her, cold, measured, almost relieved. "It's complicated, but she and I, it just makes sense. Her family's been good to us. To me." Emma laughed, a sound sharp enough to make the couple at the next table glance over. "Good to you," she repeated. "That's what this is about, isn't it? You want a shortcut." He didn't argue. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the small velvet box she'd returned to him after the fitting. Inside, the engagement ring caught the light, a pale diamond surrounded by frost. "I think it's best if you take this back," he said flatly. She pushed the box toward him. "Keep it. You'll need it soon enough." For a second, something flickered across his face, shame, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and without another word, left her sitting there with her untouched coffee and the echo of a life that had just collapsed. The snow hit harder when she stepped outside. Minneapolis looked blurred, almost dreamlike. Her breath came out in uneven clouds as she walked, no destination in mind, just the need to move, to feel something other than the hollow ringing in her chest. By the time she reached the modest house on Willow Street, her fingers were numb. Patricia Caldwell opened the door before Emma even knocked. Her mother's silver hair was tied back, her eyes tired but kind, the kind of warmth that made the tears harder to hold. "Sweetheart," Patricia said softly, taking her coat. "What happened?" Emma tried to answer, but her voice cracked. "He's gone." Patricia didn't ask more. She just pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly, like she had when Emma was a child scared of thunderstorms. "Then let him go," she whispered. "You don't chase people who can't see your worth." They stood there for a long time, they only sound the ticking of the old kitchen clock. Later that night, after Patricia went to bed, Emma sat alone in the kitchen. The house creaked with winter wind. On the table lay her engagement planner, a pastel notebook filled with dreams now meaningless, guest lists, color swatches, the name Aaron Blake written in looping cursive. She turned off the lamp, leaving the room bathed in the dim light of the street outside. Snowflakes brushed against the window pane like ghosts of something gentle and fleeting. Her reflection looked back at her, pale, tired, unrecognizable. For the first time, she didn't fight the tears. She let them fall, silent and unrestrained. It wasn't rage this time or heartbreak. It was the quiet collapse that comes when a person realizes there's no one left to hold on to. When the clock struck midnight, Emma finally stood, rinsed her cup, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "Tomorrow will be different." But deep down, she didn't believe it. Not yet. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the frost-covered kitchen window, turning the steam from Patricia Caldwell's coffee into a soft mist. She sat across from her daughter, studying Emma's pale face as the younger woman stirred a cup she hadn't tasted. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. Just heavy, the way grief tends to settle after a storm. "Emma," Patricia said finally, her voice gentle but firm, "don't lose your faith in goodness. Not everyone disappoints you the way he did." Emma nodded without looking up. The words were meant to heal, but they landed like a bandage over a wound still bleeding. She managed a faint smile. "I'm not sure I have much faith left, Mom." Patricia reached across the table and squeezed her hand, then borrow mine for a while. The warmth in that simple phrase stayed with Emma long after she left the kitchen. She spent the rest of the morning half-heartedly scrolling through job listings, pretending to care. She wasn't ready to return to the hospital yet, not to the same halls where Aaron used to wait for her after shifts, not to the same cafeteria where he'd once promised forever. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Becky Miller, hey Em. Still looking for work? I might have something, private care, good pay." Emma frowned and called back immediately. Becky's cheerful voice filled the line, cutting through the haze. "There's this man, wealthy, mid-30s, had an accident a year ago. Lives out by Lake Minnetonka," Becky explained. "He's looking for a live-in nurse. Mostly mobility assistance, meds, basic PT routines. You'd have your own room. Meals covered, and the salaries," she paused for effect, "more than generous." "How generous?" Emma asked skeptically. "Let's just say you could pay off your car in 3 months." That was enough to make her sit up straight. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Becky said. "But he's difficult. Fired 5 nurses already. The housekeeper's the gatekeeper. You'll have to impress her first. Her name's Mrs. Sophia Green. I told her about you." Emma hesitated. "Becky, I don't know. I'm not exactly in the best shape to deal with difficult people right now." "That's exactly why you should do it," Becky countered. "You need a change of scenery, Em. Let someone else's problems drown out yours for a while." 2 hours later, Emma found herself in front of a sprawling estate hidden behind iron gates. The sign at the entrance read Mercer Estate, the letters carved elegantly into dark wood. The long driveway wound through a forest of snow-laden pines before opening onto a modern glass and stone mansion overlooking the frozen lake. She stepped out of the rideshare, heart thudding. The cold bit at her cheeks as she walked toward the massive front door. Before she could knock, it opened. A tall, silver-haired woman in a gray wool suit stood there, posture impeccable. Her expression was polite but unreadable. "You must be Miss Caldwell," she said, voice clipped and precise. "I'm Mrs. Green." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for seeing me." Mrs. Green led her inside. The entryway gleamed with polished marble floors and minimalist decor. Cold beauty, perfectly arranged. "Mr. Mercer values order and discretion," the woman explained. "You'll find both essential if you wish to work here." They stopped at a small sitting area by the window. Mrs. Green gestured for Emma to sit, then opened a leather folder. "You come highly recommended by Ms. Miller. Your credentials check out. Before we proceed, this is a confidentiality agreement." She slid the document across the table. Emma read quickly. No photographs, no outside contact without approval, No discussions about the patient's health or personal life. It was stricter than any hospital policy she'd known. "I understand," Emma said, signing her name. "Mrs." Green nodded approvingly. "You'd be responsible for medication schedules, meal coordination, and assisting with therapy. 2 days off per month. Starting salary, $100,000 a year, plus benefits." Emma blinked. "That's triple what I made at the hospital." "Mr. Mercer can afford to be generous," Mrs. Green said. "He demands professionalism and privacy in return. Does that frighten you?" "Honestly." Emma met her gaze. "No, I think I could use a challenge." For the first time, the woman's lips curved into something almost resembling a smile. "Then you'll report tomorrow at noon. Bring your essentials. Everything else will be provided." As Emma signed the final form, a strange calm washed over her. It wasn't happiness exactly, more like quiet surrender to whatever fate had planned next. When she stepped back outside, snow had begun falling again, soft and slow. A black SUV idled by the gate, waiting to take her home. As the car pulled away, she watched the trees blur past, pine branches heavy with frost, the pale sky fading into silver mist. For the first time in weeks, she felt something stir inside her, fragile but real. Maybe this was what starting over looked like. Not fireworks or redemption, but a silent drive through winter woods, heading toward a life she hadn't imagined but might finally deserve. The next day, the SUV rolled through a long stretch of pine forest before the road opened to reveal Mercer Estate in full view. The house looked like something drawn from another world. Steel, glass, and stone layered into sharp, elegant lines. It stood at the edge of Lake Minnetonka, where the water had frozen solid, the surface glistening white under the midday sun. The place was beautiful, but it didn't feel alive. It felt paused. "Mrs." Green met Emma at the door, her posture as precise as before. "Mr. Mercer is expecting you," she said, then paused briefly, lowering her voice. "You'll find he values punctuality." The warmth inside the house was almost suffocating after the cold outside. Every surface gleamed, every object in its exact place, like a museum no one dared to touch. The air carried faint notes of antiseptic and cedarwood. "Where should I put my things?" Emma asked softly. "Upstairs. Second door on the left. But first, Mr. Mercer would like to see you." Emma followed Mrs. Green through a long hallway lined with abstract paintings. Dark colors, heavy brushstrokes. They stopped at an open doorway. Inside, sunlight filtered through tall windows, falling across the sleek frame of a wheelchair turned toward the view of the lake. "Mr. Mercer," Mrs. Green announced. "This is Miss Caldwell, your new live-in nurse." The man in the chair didn't turn immediately. When he did, Emma's breath caught for a moment. Daniel Mercer was younger than she'd imagined. Mid-30s, handsome in a sharp, almost severe way. His jaw was clean-shaven, his dark hair slightly overgrown, his eyes an icy gray that seemed to weigh everything they looked at. "So," he said, his voice low, steady, but unmistakably detached. "Number 6. Emma frowned, unsure she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry." "You're the 6th nurse in 10 months, he said flatly. "I like to keep count. Helps me manage expectations." Mrs. Green gave a subtle shake of her head. "Don't argue." But Emma only smiled faintly. "Then I'll try not to make it to 7. Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, maybe amusement, but it was gone too quickly to tell. He gestured toward the files on the table beside him. Medication logs, therapy notes, dietary restrictions. Read them. Memorize them. And please, spare me the sympathy speeches. I've heard them all." "I wasn't planning to give one," Emma replied evenly. That earned her a long, assessing glance. He seemed ready to challenge her, but Mrs. Green cut in smoothly. "Mr. Mercer, it's almost time for your meal. Shall I have it brought here?" "No," he said, turning back toward the window. "In the dining room. Let's make our guest feel part of the household routine." The dining room was vast, its walls of glass looking out over the frozen lake. The table could have seated 10, but only 3 places were set. Mrs. Green sat at one end, Daniel at the other, and Emma somewhere between them. An awkward triangle of silence. Daniel ate methodically, his every motion deliberate. The only sounds were the faint scrape of silverware and the soft crackle from the fireplace. Mrs. Green eventually broke the silence. "Miss Caldwell, have you lived in Minnesota long?" "Born and raised," Emma said. "My mother's still here. She's a teacher." "Good," Mrs. Green replied. "Stability matters in this job." She hesitated, lowering her voice as she set down her fork. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Caldwell. Mr. Mercer has driven 5 nurses to resignation. Not because he's cruel, but because he doesn't tolerate weakness." Daniel's eyes lifted slowly. "You make me sound like a monster." "Only a man who refuses help," Mrs. Green said calmly. He looked away again, jaw tightening. "Maybe that's because I don't need it." Emma wanted to speak, to remind him that refusing help wasn't strength, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't her place. Not yet. When the meal ended, Mrs. Green showed her to her room. It was simple, but comfortable, overlooking the same stretch of lake. The ice outside caught the evening light like shattered glass. Emma unpacked quietly, her mind replaying every moment of that dinner. The tension, the brittle pride in his voice, the way he avoided looking at his reflection in the window. Beneath the arrogance, she had seen something else: exhaustion. As night settled over the estate, she stood by the window and whispered to herself, "He's not cruel. He's just broken." And somewhere downstairs, in the darkened study by the lake, Daniel Mercer stared out at the frozen horizon, thinking the very same thing, though neither of them would have admitted it. The estate was silent except for the wind whispering through the pine trees outside. It was well past midnight when Emma stirred in her bed, startled by a faint metallic clatter echoing down the hallway. For a moment she thought it was just the heating system, but then came another sound, measured, rhythmic, strained. Something heavy shifting, then the dull thud of metal against rubber. She slipped on her cardigan and stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The house at night felt different, colder, cavernous, the shadows stretching like they had a heartbeat of their own. She followed the sound through the long hallway that led to the lower floor, where faint light spilled from beneath a door at the end. Pushing it open, she froze. The private gym was vast, its walls lined with mirrors and chrome equipment that gleamed under recessed ceiling lights. And in the center of the room, gripping the rails of a set of parallel bars, was Daniel Mercer. He wasn't in his chair. Sweat darkened the fabric of his t-shirt, his arms trembling with the effort to keep himself upright. His breath came ragged, teeth clenched, every muscle in his shoulders drawn tight. He managed one step, one small, stubborn step, before his right leg gave way. The wheelchair behind him stood empty, like a silent witness. Emma's gasp broke the rhythm of the moment. Daniel whipped his head toward her, eyes blazing. "What are you doing here?" "I heard something," she said quietly, still near the doorway. "I thought." "You thought what?" he snapped, voice sharp enough to cut. "That I'd fallen? That I needed rescuing." He tried to straighten, gripping the rails again, but his hand slipped. The jolt sent a flash of pain through his expression. Instinctively, Emma took a step forward. "Let me." "Don't," he barked. "Don't you dare." The words hung in the air like frost. She stopped where she was, heart pounding. He stared at her, chest heaving, anger covering something far more fragile. "You shouldn't have come here," he said through his teeth. "You don't belong in this part of my life." Emma held her ground. "Then what part of your life does anyone belong to, Daniel?" "The part where you sit by the window and pretend you're not still fighting to stand." His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He turned away, reaching for the chair. His hand shook slightly, betraying the exhaustion that pride refused to admit. Without a word, Emma walked to the far end of the bars, standing quietly until his eyes flicked up again. You don't have to do this alone, she said softly. He let out a bitter laugh. You think a nurse can fix this? I think a human being can try. Silence stretched between them, thick with defiance. She didn't move closer, didn't reach out, just waited. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered himself into the chair, sweat glistening on his forehead. The defiance in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something weary and real. You saw nothing tonight, he muttered. Then let me be the one who helps you keep it that way, she replied. That made him pause. He studied her face, as if searching for pity and finding none. Why? He asked finally. Because I've seen people give up, she said. And I know what it looks like when someone hasn't. For a long moment, the only sound was his uneven breathing. Then, quietly, he said, If we do this, it's on my terms. No reports, no therapists, no witnesses. You understand. Emma nodded. On one condition. He frowned. What condition? You trust me. He looked at her, the hint of a smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. That's not something I give easily. I'm not asking you to give it, she said. Just don't take it away once it's there. Mrs. Green's voice called faintly from upstairs, a floorboard creaking, the sound of the old house breathing again. The moment passed, leaving only the faint hum of the lights above. Daniel turned back toward the window at the far end of the gym. Outside, the lake glowed faintly under the snowlight, a thin veil of white drifting across the glass. You should get some sleep, Miss Caldwell, he said quietly, almost gently. Emma nodded. You too, Mr. Mercer. When she left, he didn't move for a long time. His hand still rested on the rails, his breath still unsteady, but his gaze followed the doorway she had disappeared through. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. Snow began to fall harder outside, soft flakes swirling against the window pane. Daniel looked at them for a while, his reflection faint in the glass. Shoulders slumped, eyes tired, but no longer entirely alone. The next few days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Every morning at 7, Emma arrived in the gym where Daniel waited, always pretending he wasn't waiting. The sessions were long, tense, and often ended with him snapping something sharp she refused to take personally. He hated being told what to do, but he hated failing more. Straighten your spine, she'd remind him. You're compensating with your arms again. I know what I'm doing, he'd mutter, jaw tight, muscles trembling. You wouldn't still need me if you did, she'd counter evenly. And for a fleeting second, his lips would twitch. Not a smile exactly, but the closest he had come to one. The progress was slow, but undeniable. Each day, he stood a little longer, moved a little steadier, learned to fall and rise again without shattering. Sometimes she caught the flicker of pride in his eyes before he buried it under sarcasm. By the fourth morning, Emma arrived to find him already at the bars, his breath visible in the cold air. You're early, she said, surprised. I don't like waiting for anyone, Daniel replied. That makes two of us. It was becoming their language, banter layered over the silence of shared determination. The bruises on his hands were proof that this was no longer about control. It was about trust, a quiet pact forged not with promises but with effort. Mrs. Green watched them from the doorway sometimes, saying nothing, but her expression softened when Emma guided Daniel's balance, never touching him unless he asked. The air between nurse and patient had shifted, no longer wary, just charged with the fragile respect that grows between two people rebuilding something broken. Then, one cold morning, the spell broke. Mrs. Green's voice called up the stairs. Mr. Doyle is here to see you, sir. Emma glanced at Daniel. His entire body went still, shoulders rigid. Patrick Doyle, he repeated, the name tasting bitter. An old business partner, Mrs. Green added, before disappearing down the hall. Daniel exhaled slowly, wheeling himself toward the office. You should take a break, Miss Caldwell. Emma hesitated. Do you want me to leave? His tone softened just enough to sound final. I said take a break. She nodded, though curiosity gnawed at her. From the hallway, she heard the faint murmur of men's voices, the low hum of polite hostility. When she passed the office a few minutes later, she caught a glimpse through the half-open door. Patrick Doyle was tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy charm of a man used to getting his way. His smile was polished, but his eyes carried calculation. "You're looking well, Daniel," he said, setting a sleek leather folder on the desk. "Better than I expected, given the circumstances." Daniel's expression stayed unreadable. "You didn't come here to check on my health." Patrick laughed, sitting down like he owned the chair. "No, I came to talk about the company. There's been momentum. Investors are eager for stability. The board thinks it might be time to consider a new management structure, more modern, less dependent on one man's recovery." Emma froze just outside the doorway. The phrasing was too smooth to be innocent. Share transfer, new management, the same words Becky had used once to describe corporate takeovers. Daniel's hand tightened on the armrest. "You mean less dependent on the man who built it?" Patrick spread his hands in mock surrender. "It's nothing personal. You've done an incredible job, Daniel. But recovery takes time. The market doesn't wait." "Markets can be patient," Daniel said coldly. "People can't." Their eyes locked. Two men who'd once been allies, now standing on opposite ends of a crumbling empire. Patrick smiled again, that smooth, infuriating grin. "Just think about it. We're all on the same side here." "I doubt that," Daniel replied. When Patrick finally left, Emma stepped back into the gym, pretending she'd just returned from her break. Daniel came in a few minutes later, his face pale but composed. "Everything all right?" she asked carefully. "Fine," he said, too quickly. "Let's continue." But his movements were jerky, distracted, the focus gone. She adjusted the weights, silent. The air between them felt heavier now, threaded with unspoken tension neither dared name. That night, as she passed by his office, Emma saw him still awake, papers spread across the desk, the light of the computer reflecting in his eyes. He wasn't reading, he was fighting, and for the first time, she realized she wasn't just his nurse anymore. She was part of something fragile and dangerous, something that could shatter with the next visitor who came bearing smiles and contracts. The night had fallen quiet over the Mercer estate. Snow pressed against the windows like a living thing, muting every sound except the faint hum of the heating vents and the occasional creak of wood shifting under the cold. Emma had finished sorting Daniel's medications for the week and was on her way back to her room when she heard a low voice from the far end of the corridor. It was smooth, deliberate, and unmistakably familiar. Patrick Doyle. She froze. He was supposed to have left hours ago after his afternoon meeting with Daniel. Why was he still here? Following the sound carefully, she stopped beside the slightly open door leading to the library. Patrick stood near the window, his back half-turned, phone pressed to his ear. The dim lamplight cast long shadows across the floor, his reflection ghosted in the glass. "Yes," he said, his tone dripping with smug certainty. "It's all going according to plan. Once he signs those papers, we'll own Mercer Tech. The transition will look legitimate. Daniel won't even see it coming." Emma's breath caught. There was a pause, then Patrick laughed softly. "Of course, Natalie. You and Aaron, just stay patient. He's too proud to ask questions. The man still thinks I'm his friend." Natalie. Aaron. Emma's stomach dropped. The air seemed to vanish from the room. The same Natalie Doyle who had stolen Aaron away from her. The same Aaron who had walked out of that café, leaving her broken under the snow. They were all tied to Patrick. The same web. The same betrayal. Her hand tightened around the edge of the doorframe. She wanted to burst in, to confront him, to scream that she knew. But her instincts, the ones honed from years in the hospital, whispered otherwise. Observe first, act later. Patrick's voice lowered, conspiratorial now. "He still trusts me. After everything. Poor bastard doesn't realize he's signing over control the moment that trust hits the paper." Mercer Tech will be ours within a week. Emma stepped back before she could make a sound, heart pounding so loudly she was afraid he'd hear. When she reached the hallway, she pressed her back to the wall, trying to catch her breath. It didn't make sense, not entirely, but the pieces were there. Daniel's tension whenever Patrick visited, his refusal to discuss company affairs, the constant paperwork, and now Aaron. Tied to all of it, she felt sick. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her hands together. The wind rattled the panes like fingers demanding to be heard. Should she tell Daniel? Would he believe her? Her mind raced back to his face earlier that week, the suspicion, the wall he kept between them. He barely trusted her with his therapy, let alone something like this. And Patrick, charming, polished Patrick, had been his ally for years. To accuse him without proof would make her look paranoid at best, manipulative at worst. But if she stayed silent, he'd lose everything. Emma stared at the snow outside, the world blurred beyond the glass. It wasn't just about Daniel now. Aaron was part of it, the same man who'd chosen wealth over love. The irony cut deep. She had left him behind, only to find herself entangled in his shadow again. The thought made her nauseous. She paced the room, running a hand through her hair. No, she couldn't keep this to herself. She'd seen enough of what silence cost people. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the hall and made her way toward Daniel's office. The lights were still on. He was where he always was, sitting in his chair by the desk, reading through financial reports, every line of his body tense with quiet purpose. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly from the doorway. He looked up. "It's late." "I know, but I overheard something. From Patrick." That got his attention. He straightened slightly, his expression tightening. "What kind of something?" Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "He was on the phone. He mentioned a takeover. That once you sign the papers, they'll own Mercer Tech." He named Natalie Doyle and Aaron Blake. The name hung in the air like smoke. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Aaron Blake." She nodded. He was someone I used to know. They're all connected. Patrick's been feeding them information. I'm sure of it. Daniel's face hardened. "And you're basing this on what?" "Eavesdropping." She flinched slightly at the tone. "You don't understand." "No, I think I do." His voice cut through the room like ice. "You overheard half a conversation and came running to me with wild accusations against one of my oldest partners. Do you have proof?" "I heard him say it," she insisted. "I know what I heard." "That's not proof," he snapped. "That's conjecture." The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Emma felt her throat tighten, but she refused to look away. "I'm not lying to you." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Then he exhaled sharply, the tension in his shoulders unbroken. "You should get some rest, Miss Caldwell. You've done enough for today." The formality in his tone stung more than the words. She nodded, stepping back into the hall. The door closed softly behind her, but the sound felt final, like a verdict. As she walked toward her room, the house seemed heavier than before, the silence oppressive. Snow continued to fall outside, coating the trees and the frozen lake in white. Somewhere in that stillness, trust, so fragile and rare, had cracked just a little more. And Daniel, alone in his office, stared at the documents on his desk, trying to convince himself she was wrong, even as a single doubt began to whisper at the edges of his mind. The hours that followed their argument stretched into silence. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every word, every look of disbelief in Daniel's eyes. Outside, the storm had quieted, leaving only the softness of snow sliding from the roof. Somewhere below, a door creaked. Moments later came a faint knock. "Miss Caldwell," Daniel's voice said through the door, low and uncertain. She sat up immediately, heart pounding. "Come in." He entered, his wheelchair gliding quietly across the carpet. The harshness from earlier was gone, replaced by something more guarded, almost hesitant. Resting a thick folder on her nightstand, he said, "I need your opinion. A professional one." Emma blinked. "On what?" He hesitated, then opened the folder. Inside were contracts, dense text, legal jargon, and pages marked with Patrick Doyle's signature. "These are the new partnership agreements he's been pushing. I've read them a dozen times, but I can't shake the feeling something's off. I need an objective set of eyes." Her surprise softened into something like relief. He didn't say it, but this was his way of apologizing. "All right," she said quietly, pulling the lamp closer. "Let's see." For the next half hour, Emma read in silence while Daniel waited, his gaze fixed on the snowy darkness outside. Her background in patient administration wasn't legal expertise, but she'd handled enough contracts to recognize red flags. And then she saw it, buried deep in a subsection of small print near the end. Her breath caught. "Daniel," she murmured, tapping the paragraph. "Here, in the event of incapacitation or sustained inability to perform executive duties, controlling interest shall be automatically transferred to the acting board representative." He frowned. That clause was meant for emergency continuity. "It's standard. It's not," she interrupted softly. "Not like this. There's no reversal clause. No board review. It's a permanent transfer of control." The realization hit him visibly, the color draining from his face. He took the papers from her and read the section again, his jaw tightening with each line. "Patrick had these drawn up months ago," he said finally, "before the accident." Emma met his eyes. "He knew you'd be vulnerable. He planned this." For a long moment, neither spoke. The firelight flickered across the pages, illuminating the neat signature at the bottom, his own. "I signed this," Daniel whispered, "the night before the crash." Emma's heart twisted. "He set you up." He looked away, the weight of betrayal settling over him. "I told myself you were mistaken," he said quietly. "I didn't want to believe it." "You believe me now?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. When she finally drifted to sleep, Daniel was still there, motionless, staring at the paper like it was something alive and poisonous. The next morning, Emma drove into town to refill his prescriptions. The sky was pale and brittle, the kind of cold that seemed to scrape the lungs. Inside the small pharmacy, she handed over the list and waited by the counter. And then she heard it. "Emma Caldwell," a too familiar voice said from behind her. She turned and froze. Aaron Blake stood there, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his arm wrapped casually around Natalie Doyle, the same Natalie who had smiled across that café table like she'd already won. "Well, if it isn't the good nurse," Aaron said with a grin. "Still patching people up?" Emma said nothing, her hands clenched around the paper bag. Natalie laughed softly. "She's working for Daniel Mercer, right? Daddy said she's living in the estate. Must be nice, taking care of a paralyzed CEO who's about to lose everything." Aaron smirked. "Poetic, isn't it? Some people just can't stop attaching themselves to sinking ships." The words burned, but Emma didn't move. She slipped her phone from her pocket, hit record, and let them talk. Natalie continued. "Patrick says once the paperwork clears, Mercer Tech is practically ours. He'll sign the rest without even reading it. Can you imagine? Millions, just because he trusted the wrong people." Aaron chuckled. Classic Mercer. Arrogant enough to build an empire, naive enough to lose it overnight. Emma turned away before her expression betrayed her. She thanked a pharmacist, took the bag, and walked out into the cold without a word. Her hands shook as she stopped by her car, replaying the recording. Their voices were crystal clear. When she returned to the estate that evening, Daniel was in the study, the same folder open in front of him. He looked up as she entered, eyes tired but alert. "I went to town," she said, her voice steady, "and I found something you should hear." She handed him her phone. The recording played in the silence of the room, every word from Aaron and Natalie filling the space like poison. Daniel didn't interrupt. When it ended, he sat very still, then closed his eyes for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, deliberate. "I believe you now." The words were simple, but they carried weight, an acknowledgement, a truce, and something fragile rebuilding between them. Outside, the lake was beginning to thaw beneath the twilight, the first sign that winter would soon give way to something new. The morning Patrick returned, the lake outside lay shrouded in fog, the kind that blurred every outline and made distance hard to measure. Inside Mercer Estate, the same sense of stillness filled the air, heavy waiting. Emma was helping Daniel adjust the brace on his right leg when Mrs. Green appeared at the door, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Doyle has arrived," she said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Send him in." Patrick entered with his usual polished ease, a designer coat draped across his arm, his smile a perfect imitation of sincerity. "Daniel," he said warmly, "it's good to see you up and about. You're looking stronger." "Cut to the reason you're here," Daniel replied flatly. Patrick chuckled, setting a leather folder on the desk. "Always direct. Fine then. I've brought the final transfer agreements. Once you sign, the board will approve the new structure and the company will finally stabilize. Everyone wins." Emma stood slightly behind Daniel, silent but alert. Patrick glanced at her with thinly veiled contempt. "Ah, yes, the new nurse. Still here, I see. How loyal." Daniel ignored the jab, flipping the folder open. The contract was dense, but the clauses Emma had pointed out, the trap, were still there, untouched. He looked up slowly. "You didn't change a thing." Patrick's smile faltered. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Daniel said. "You brought the same contract that would strip me of control. You think I wouldn't notice?" Patrick's tone turned defensive. "That clause is standard, Daniel. It protects the company in case you die." Daniel interrupted. "Lose my mind? Or simply become inconvenient?" Patrick's composure slipped for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "You're letting paranoia cloud your judgment. This is business, not betrayal." Emma stepped forward before she could stop herself. "You mean the kind of business that involves secret calls to Aaron Blake and Natalie Doyle?" Patrick turned sharply toward her, eyes narrowing. "So that's it. You've been filling his head with nonsense. I knew bringing you here was a mistake." Daniel's voice dropped an octave, cold and measured. "Careful." But Patrick only leaned closer to Emma, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "You think he actually trusts you? You're just another pretty face in a nurse's uniform, a gold-digging opportunist hoping for a miracle paycheck." Emma froze, her throat tightening. Daniel's hand closed over the armrest of his wheelchair. The tension in the room shifted like the air before a storm. "Say that again," he said quietly. Patrick blinked. "Daniel, come on. I'm trying to save you from—" The words cut off as Daniel pushed against the armrests, his arms trembling, his breath sharp and controlled. Slowly, with visible effort, he rose from the chair. Emma's eyes widened. She'd seen him stand before, but never like this. Steady, deliberate, without assistance. His left hand gripped the handle of the cane beside him, his knuckles white but unshaking. Patrick stared, stunned. You can stand." Daniel's gaze was level, the gray in his eyes burning now. "I can do a lot more than stand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And this conversation ends now." The room fell completely silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Patrick took a step back, face pale but defiant. "You're making a mistake, Daniel. I've been the one keeping your company alive while you've been hiding in this glass cage. The board trusts me. The investors trust me. They trusted you," Daniel said, his words cutting clean through the air, "until I show them what you've done." Patrick's expression hardened. "You think anyone will believe you over me? I built this deal. I have the signatures. You have nothing but that woman's word. Daniel took a slow step forward, the cane striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. I have my own voice back, Patrick. And trust me, people will listen. For the first time, Patrick looked uncertain. His charm cracked, revealing the edge of fear beneath. He gathered his folder, his tone icy. You're going to regret this. Both of you. Daniel said nothing. He simply turned away, dismissing him without a glance. Patrick lingered another heartbeat, then left, his footsteps echoing through the corridor like a retreating storm. When the door finally closed, Emma realized she'd been holding her breath. Her hands trembled as she looked at Daniel. You stood on your own, she whispered. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the desk for balance. Barely. That's not the point, she said, her voice unsteady. You did it. He met her eyes, tired, fierce, but softened in a way she hadn't seen before. You were right about him, he said. About all of it. She shook her head. You didn't have to prove it like that. His mouth curved in a faint, weary smile. Maybe I did. A beat passed. Then, quietly, he added, Thank you for staying when everyone else left. Outside, the fog began to lift from the lake, revealing faint patches of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Inside, Emma stood in silence, watching as Daniel eased back into his chair. Not defeated this time, but steady, resolute. For the first time since she arrived, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive again. The days that followed felt like the calm before a reckoning. Mercer Estate was no longer cloaked in silence. It pulsed with quiet purpose. Each morning began the same. Emma entering the gym at sunrise, the faint orange glow of dawn spilling across the floor as Daniel gripped the parallel bars. Determination etched into every movement. Again, she'd say softly. He'd nod, jaw set, sweat dripping down his temple. His steps were still uneven, but they were steps nonetheless, solid, deliberate, defiant. What began as therapy had become ritual, a shared battle fought in rhythm and breath. One morning, after a particularly long session, he leaned on the cane and said between breaths, I forgot what standing felt like. Emma smiled faintly. You never forgot. You just stopped believing it was possible. He glanced at her, a rare warmth flickering behind his tired eyes. You have a habit of making impossible things sound easy. I'm a nurse, she said, teasing. It's part of the job description. But it wasn't just recovery they were working on. As soon as the physical training ended, the real fight began, the legal one. Daniel spent long hours on calls with his attorney, a sharp woman named Melissa Torres, gathering every document Patrick had manipulated and every email that hinted at a breach of fiduciary duty. Emma often found herself quietly assisting, organizing files, cross-checking dates, highlighting discrepancies. The mansion transformed into a war room. Folders piled high, diagrams and timelines mapped across the study wall. Daniel's voice, once bitter and withdrawn, carried purpose again. The weight that had crushed him since the accident seemed to shift, still heavy, but now something he could lift. Late one afternoon, Emma entered the study, carrying a tray of coffee. The setting sun poured through the windows, bathing the room in amber light. Papers covered the desk, but Daniel's focus wasn't on them. He stood by the window looking out at the lake. The ice had begun to melt, thin streaks of water shimmering between the white. You can almost see the reflection again, he murmured. Emma followed his gaze. It's beautiful when it starts to thaw, she said, like the world's learning to breathe again. He turned to her. That's exactly how it feels. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't heavy, it was gentle. Neither of them spoke, but everything unspoken lived there in the space. Gratitude, respect, something deeper that neither dared name. Melissa's confident. Emma asked, breaking the moment softly. Daniel nodded. She believes we have enough to expose Patrick. The board will review everything in 2 days. And you? I'm ready, he said simply. For the first time in months, I feel like myself again. Emma smiled. Then let's make sure you walk into that room like the CEO you are. He laughed quietly. You're relentless, you know that? Someone has to be. The next morning, Daniel insisted on practicing standing during a mock presentation. Emma sat across from him with a notepad, pretending to be the board. He made it through the entire speech without losing his balance. When he finished, she clapped softly and he rolled his eyes, but the pride in his face was unmistakable. That evening, as they reviewed documents one last time, Emma noticed the photo on his desk. A younger Daniel with his late father at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Both men smiling in front of the Mercer Tech sign. He'd be proud, she said quietly. Daniel followed her gaze, his voice softer. He taught me to build things that last. I just forgot that trust isn't one of them. Emma hesitated, then said, maybe it still can be, if you give it to the right people. Their eyes met briefly. The air between them shifted again, warmer, heavier, threaded with understanding neither tried to explain. When she left the study that night, Daniel lingered by the window, watching her reflection fade down the hall. He didn't call after her, didn't say the words that hovered in his chest. It wasn't time yet. And upstairs, Emma sat in the quiet of her room, the light from the lake glinting across her window pane. She knew what she felt wasn't simple, and maybe it wasn't meant to be. Some connections weren't born out of romance. They were built in the wreckage, forged by pain and patience. The next dawn would bring the final test. For now, the lake outside shimmered gold under the fading light, and the house, once haunted by silence, breathed again with hope. The day of the board meeting dawned cold and bright. Frost still rimmed the edges of the Mercer estate windows, but the lake outside was beginning to stir, streaks of thaw cutting through the ice like veins of light. Inside, the air hummed with quiet resolve. Daniel Mercer stood in front of the mirror, his suit pressed, his tie perfectly knotted. Beside him, his cane leaned against the dresser, a symbol of progress more than limitation. Emma stood at the doorway, her hands clasped. "You're ready," she said softly. Daniel looked up, meeting her reflection in the mirror. "I've been ready for a long time," he said. Then, with steady precision, he took the cane and turned toward her. His steps were slow but sure, every one of them earned. An hour later, they arrived at Mercer Tech's downtown headquarters. The lobby was a blur of familiar faces, assistants whispering, executives glancing in disbelief as Daniel crossed the marble floor unaided except for his cane. It was the first time most of them had seen him standing since the accident. Whispers rippled through the crowd. When the glass doors to the boardroom opened, silence fell. Patrick Doyle was already there, his polished charm strained beneath the weight of anticipation. To his right sat Natalie Doyle, her expression carefully neutral, and beside her Aaron Blake, smug but pale, as if uncertain which side of history he was on. "Daniel," Patrick said, rising with feigned warmth. "It's good to see you on your feet." Daniel's voice was calm, almost detached. "You might want to sit down, Patrick. You'll need it." Patrick's smile faltered. Around the table, the board members exchanged curious glances. Daniel placed a folder on the table and nodded to Melissa Torres, his attorney, who began distributing the documents. "These," Daniel said evenly, "are copies of unauthorized share transfer agreements submitted under my digital signature during my recovery. They were filed without my knowledge or consent. You'll notice the timing, 2 weeks after my accident, when I was still under medical observation." Patrick shifted in his seat. "That's absurd. You signed those contracts yourself." "We discussed." "We didn't," Daniel cut in, "because you arranged for me to sign them electronically using credentials you obtained while I was sedated." He turned to the board. "We traced the IP address of every login. They all led back to Patrick's home office." Gasps murmured around the table. Melissa spoke next, firm and clear. "Under Section 409 of Fiduciary Duty Law, this qualifies as gross misconduct and breach of trust. Mr. Doyle acted in bad faith, to transfer controlling shares without board approval. Patrick's composure cracked. "You can't prove intent," he snapped. Daniel's voice didn't rise. "Intent was never the question. Your arrogance is." He opened another folder and pressed play on a recording. Patrick's voice filled the room. Smooth, familiar, dripping with certainty. "Once he signs those papers, we'll own Mercer Tech." The silence that followed was absolute. Patrick turned ghostly white. Natalie's face drained of color. Aaron stared at the table, jaw tight. Daniel folded his hands, calm as ever. "That recording was made the night you stayed late at my house, Patrick. The same night you told me you were still my friend." No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one of the senior board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice steady but respectful, "you have our full support. Effective immediately, we motion to revoke Mr. Doyle's role and privileges pending formal review." Another board member nodded. Seconded. All in favor. Hands rose across the table, unanimous. Patrick pushed back his chair abruptly. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think this company will survive your sentimentality? You'll drown it with your pride." Daniel met his glare with quiet finality. Better pride than corruption. Patrick's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. He gathered his papers in trembling hands and stormed out of the room, Natalie following quickly, her heels clicking like echoes of defeat. Aaron lingered, eyes darting between Emma and Daniel, then lowered his gaze and left without a word. The moment the door closed, Daniel exhaled. The sound wasn't relief, it was release. The boardroom slowly emptied, handshakes and quiet congratulations following him out. Emma stood by the door, watching him. When their eyes met, the corners of his mouth curved upward. Not the restrained politeness she'd seen before, but something genuine. A real smile. "Looks like it's finally over," she said. He shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "It's finally beginning." That afternoon, the fog lifted from Lake Minnetonka, revealing a sky washed in hues of rose and silver. The air was warmer now, the edges of winter softening. Emma and Daniel walked slowly along the path that curved beside the water, the snow melting beneath their feet, leaving behind damp earth and the faint scent of pine. He moved carefully, leaning on his cane, but steady, every step measured. Emma walked beside him, her scarf fluttering in the soft wind. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent months hating that lake. Watching it freeze felt like watching myself disappear." "And now?" she asked. "Now it's thawing," he said, eyes glinting with faint amusement. "Guess that's something." She smiled. "You'll walk without that cane soon." He chuckled. "Maybe, but not today." They stopped at the water's edge. The surface shimmered like glass, catching the pink of the sky. Their reflections wavered. Two figures standing close, no longer bound by pain, only by the quiet understanding of survival. Daniel looked at her, his voice low. "You were right, you know. About trust." Emma met his gaze. "And you were right about fighting back." He nodded slowly, the light catching his profile. "We make a good team." "For now," she teased. "For always," he said softly. The breeze carried the faint sound of melting ice, dripping into the lake below. Emma felt a strange peace settle over her, a calm she hadn't known in years. The world around them was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence this time, one earned through struggle and truth. They began to walk again, their steps matching, slow and deliberate. Behind them, the house stood against the fading light, no longer a place of pain, but of second chances. By the time the sun dipped fully below the horizon, the first stars had appeared over the lake. No revenge, no bitterness, just peace, the kind that doesn't shout but simply exists patient and sure.